generally speaking, I think it was a force for good, as history will show. And I think the new American imperialism is simply not a force for good. I think it's a force for evil. And most of my friends, libertarian friends in the United States, completely concur. So it's like us here, when we go abroad, people perhaps criticise the United Kingdom for the antics of our government, which have nothing to do with us, sadly, under the system that we now have. The sort of muppets that run this country now have no support at all from ordinary people, which is why, of course, ordinary people, generally speaking, have disengaged from politics. And that's a great shame. But if you go back to the theme that I would argue about law and its protection of the citizen, and I can only use from an empirical point of view. I'm an Englishman, brought up in England, and so that's what I have experienced, and I think it's always difficult if you're looking at other people's traditions. But certainly I think perhaps I could almost even speak for the Anglosphere. That is how it has evolved over many hundreds of years and many generations. And of course, as we all know, in Washington there is a fair copy of Magna Carta, which they revere. They believe that that was the start too of their written constitution, or written in one constitution. We have a constitution too, which is generally forgotten, of course. It's just not in one document that you can put on a tea towel. But it's there nevertheless, and extremely important for that. But that protection gave, over a number of years, over the generations, I think, the English legal system, which I regard, warts and all, to be one of the best that the world has ever seen, which is why it has been adopted by so many other countries on the face of the planet. It's a very good system, and it gives us some fundamental principles of English law, which I regard, when I was doing my exams as a young boy in the city, struggling through my general principles of English law, which was written heavily on my soul, that there were certain principles which were immovable, as it were, and that was the presumption of innocence, which is extremely important, trial by jury, which of course came later and only in part, and I accept that was a very slow process, as indeed was habeas corpus, a writ of habeas corpus. This thing did not happen overnight, it didn't happen all at once, it evolved over hundreds of years. But it does mean that we had a system up to relatively recently, which gave you some fundamental principles. That's trial by jury, the presumption of innocence, and habeas corpus. And some of those fundamental principles, which I think are the rock on which a good legal system should be founded. And again, when I was studying at the Royal College of Defence Studies, I used to have to sit and listen to lecturers from Lancaster House, largely paid by the Foreign Office. And if you have any doubt about it, the reason it's called the Foreign Office, just like Yes Minister, is it's because it represents the views and interests of foreigners. Otherwise they'd call it the British Office, wouldn't they? Of course they would. So I had to listen to these sinister, I'm sorry, I can think of no other word, sinister people telling me, or telling this group of officers from all over the Commonwealth and North America, one-star course, one-star, two-star course, that it was a very good thing that we got rid of the concept of the principles of English law, and it's now being superseded by the Napoleonic Code, if you will, or Corpus Juris, which is, of course, the European Union system, and 75% of our laws now come from Brussels, and they come as directives. There's no debate, there's no cost-benefit analysis. They come straight in with the rubber stamp of the Parliament I used to belong to. A particular brand is quite right. You could put a room full of Gibbons in there, and they would do a better job. And of course, they come from a background where they simply do not conceive or do not understand the principles of English law and the importance thereof. And of course, that it manifests itself in the European arrest warrant, which of course is a fundamental principle of this new European system that we have, this new Napoleonic code, where you can be arrested for something in this country by a foreign policeman without prima facie evidence, without a magistrate's warrant, taken away without the protection of habeas corpus, trial by jury, or the presumption of innocence. And it's happened. And it's happening more and more. And when I asked this comedian from Lancaster House about that, he didn't like me, I don't think, I was trying to explain to the group who was sitting down there, from all over the world. I said, well, this isn't true. He was telling us this. I said, well, that isn't true. You can now, under the European arrest warrant. And he waved his hand. He said, oh, yes, I know, but not many. That doesn't happen very often. Like, you can have a principle of English law which can be waved through because it doesn't happen very often. Well, you know, murder in Belgrave Square doesn't happen very often, does it? So, well, that's all right. There was one it just happened. He said, well, it doesn't happen very often. The sort of people that we are dealing with, again, I go back to the Prime Minister, people who look like they've had the benefit of an education, but not as people in this room would understand it. They've ticked the boxes. You know, they've got their 2-1, they've got their job in the city, or they've got their job in politics, or whatever it happens to be. But it's not an education as we would understand it. Certainly not, I suspect, in this room. And that means that you give things away which people, these protections for the citizen or the subject, and they don't know they have. And we're talking about the teaching religion, teaching the Church of England, or certainly the Christian religion in churches, in schools, which personally I would concur with, that's by the by. But I believe that to be right. But I would also like to see, I would regard as important, possibly even more important, the fundamental principles of English law, which are gradually being taken away from the citizen because they do not know that they have them. And it's very easy to take something away from people if they don't know they have it. And I always use the analogy, if I'm speaking at universities, if you come into my drawing room where we have knickknacks from all over the world, most of which aren't really worth very much money, particularly the plastic gondola from Venice, but that could be alongside a silver snuff box given to me by great Auntie Betty. So it's all sort of scattered in all over the drawing room, you see. Well, my wife and I don't have a clue what's actually there. So if you wanted to palm any of that over a gin and tonic and take it away, it would be years before we knew that it had gone. And we'd probably never find out. And if we did notice, we'd go, well, I don't know, when did you last see it? I don't know, 1958, I think we saw it. And then you move on. And I'm quite sure your houses are all the same, knickknacks all over the place, some valuable, some not. And you don't know what they are or where they are. But it's far more important that our youngsters know about the principles of English law. They know about these things. So they can't have them taken away. And I speak a lot at sixth forms, I speak a lot at universities, and most people have absolutely no idea what the principles of law are, or indeed how they're governed. I don't know how many times you've sat round a dinner party table, have you, and you get your woolly-minded liberal or your woolly-minded Tory who pontificates about how we are governed and how the government should do this and how they should do that. And if you then leap in and say, would you just like to explain for the benefit of everybody just how that works, because I don't think everybody here, Freddie, actually knows how it works. Change the subject straight away, because he hasn't a clue. But it doesn't stop him pontificating about it, but he doesn't know either. And I am talking about sometimes men of my own age who read law at Oxford. They have no idea how we are governed at all. And if they don't know, how on earth is the man on the Clapham omnibus going to know? That wonderful man on the Clapham omnibus. And it brings us back again, if I may, to the protection of law, the legal system. Go back as far, if you will, Sir Edward Coke, you can go back as far as that to see an Englishman's home as his castle, and now every Tom, Dick and Harry from the council can walk in with some sort of chit, some little man from the town hall. He can say that an Englishman's home is no longer his castle, which I think is another fundamental principle of the English way of life. And this is why this is why tradition and libertarianism are not at all incompatible, because your house should be your castle. It should be very difficult for anybody to come in there, but certainly up with at least a magistrate's warrant on a serious charge. Certainly not any Tom, Dick and Harry that can now do it. And you can come forward for Sir Edward Coke, and you can come right up, can't you, to that legal judgment in the 1930s when it was deemed to be, English law was deemed to be that which is judged fair by the man on the Clapham omnibus. And I think that's extremely important when it comes to natural justice, because I know we don't have omnibuses anymore, but we are all that man, or we are antecedents of that man. And it's got to be deemed to be fair. And now, of course, we have hovering over us a total and utter breach of tradition, where our final Court of Appeal is no longer the House of Lords, but is the European Court of Human Rights. A completely broken tradition, and that tradition was to protect us. It protects us, the House of Lords, and I think I need not refer to any of you here to The Winslow Boy by Terence Rattigan. You'll have seen, the older ones around will have seen the film with Charles Laughton in it, and I gather it ran in the West End quite recently. And that is, again, that's a play that I would make every schoolboy and girl watch, to understand what a wonderful system that we had, that you could take something right to the House of Lords on a matter of principle and win. That's a wonderful and extremely moving play, and it tells you all you need to know, in my view, about the wonderful system of law that we have abrogated our responsibility for by politicians, most of whom I would hang.
We will make America great again.